That's right, the United States of America is completely fucked. Here's what you need to do. Are you ready? First, you need to pass progressive gun legislation. Next, you need to enshrine women's rights in the Constitution. Next, you've got to start taxing the rich and instate a single-payer healthcare system. Then, we can start working on UBI and, yeah, I fooled you, didn't I? Sorry. All that stuff just, it isn't going to solve anything. In fact, some of it would only make things worse. I'm your comrade Ferret, visiting your screen from a foreign land to tell you, America, you're fucked. There is no saving your country. There is nothing to be done. And to avoid sounding too doomery, you shouldn't stop trying. Far from it. But you need to try harder, because nothing short of a complete reset, a full-scale revolution, will ensure a happy outcome for 330 million people. No pressure. You probably think I'm full of crap. I'm being dramatic. But I didn't always feel this way. I've had a lot of conversations with Americans in which I tell them how to solve their problems, and only gradually came to understand the United States is not Canada. It's not like anywhere else in the world. It has its own culture, its own history, and therefore its own ways in which things can be approached. Let's take the big obvious one as our primary example: gun legislation. In case you hadn't noticed, imaginary American to whom I am speaking, the entire rest of the Western world is banging on your doors and screaming, begging you to please institute some serious gun control in your country. So let's say you finally listened. Tomorrow, our Lord and Savior Joe Biden passed sweeping gun legislation modeled directly after the success story of Australia. A massive gun buyback system, followed by strict controls that essentially banned the citizenry from owning firearms. Close your eyes, take my paw, and travel with me into the world of imagination for a moment. What do you think would happen next? The nation would explode, for one thing, obviously. More than perhaps any other nation in the world, the United States holds firearms rights to be the defining factor in its own unique form of freedom. 40% of American households contain at least one gun. It is the only country in the world in which the gun ownership per capita is actually greater than 1. So the moment it comes out that there's now a gun buyback law, I don't think it would be anything less than a flight of fantasy to suggest that there wouldn't be an attempted coup headed by the extreme right wing. But let's say that doesn't happen, or that the coup is swiftly put down and things go back to normal. What happens then? Well, the police enforce the new law, of course. The American police. The same American police who tend to veer right, even far right, and have gained global notoriety for being willing to break laws and fabricate reality themselves to defend their officers. Is it believable for a moment that the police of America would enforce this law effectively? I think they would. I think they would for a portion of the population. Yeah, now we get to see why this might not have been such a good idea after all. The wealthy, whose homes are never going to be broken into by the police, whom we know are so frequently able to avoid even paying taxes, let alone getting into any trouble with the criminal justice system, their guns will be just fine. No one is going to touch those guns of the literal wealthiest class in the world, especially not when they're busy harassing, shaking down, and killing poor people, racial minorities, and trans folk to make sure that every spare bullet they own is accounted for. Good job, guys. We managed to completely disarm the classes of people who needed to be armed the most, and ensured only white, Protestant capitalists have all the guns. I'm sure this will be very good for society. Well, sheesh, did we at least get the school shooters? Nope. The majority of mass shootings that take place inside of schools are committed by white students in suburban or rural, wealthy, low-minority schools. So we probably, if anything, just made those worse too, because now that we're putting funds into strong gun legislation, there isn't much need for school security, right? Okay, this is depressing. Let's move on to other issues. Taxing the wealthy. instating universal health care, and ensuring the sovereignty of menstruating people over their own inside parts. These are all good things. There's no way it could go wrong. No rational reason not to do these things. So why haven't you? Why haven't you done it, America? In case you hadn't heard, Roe v. Wade was struck down a little bit ago and left the country wondering how this could happen. How, when around 60% of Americans believe in the right to abortion? How, when abortion was made legal half a century ago, and there have been plenty of liberal governments that could have codified it into law, not least of which is the one that's in power now? You guessed it. It's because you're fucked. Julius Nyerere nailed it. President of Tanzania until 1985 said this about America. The United States is also a one-party state, but, with typical American extravagance, they have two of them. It's generally well known among the left wing that American Democrats are not actually left. They support the occasional progressive policy, such as COVID aid or Obamacare, but otherwise position themselves not as the party that will change America for the better, bring America forward, but rather they are the only ones who can stop the Republicans from moving it backwards. And it does make you wonder, why can the Republicans make so many sweeping changes despite those changes being incredibly unpopular, and yet all the Democrats can do is try to protect what little the marginalized classes of the United States have left? The answer is simple. The Democrats are controlled opposition. The right-wing boogeyman for a long time has been a 1984-style big government that controls everything, and back in Marxist time it was parliaments and monarchs who controlled nations. The United States is not controlled by its government. Its government is controlled by large donors, businesses, wealthy lobbyists. That is, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party rule at the pleasure of the oligopoly. And you might say, okay, yeah, I knew that. But what does that have to do with the rights and protections of American citizens? Simple. Capitalism requires inequality in order to sustain its infinite growth. Even on a micro scale, with a single company, it cannot continue to become more wealthy proportionally if those it exploits are not becoming less so. Resources aren't a zero-sum game, but we're talking about proportion here in the capitalist economy. If this year you can buy something for $1 and you make $10, and next year you can buy that same thing for $2 and you make $20, yes, that is growth, but it isn't proportional. You aren't actually becoming more wealthy. In order to become more wealthy, you need to make $30 while that thing is $2. And in order for that to happen, wages need to be kept low enough that demand for that thing is kept low enough for it to remain at $2. And how do you do that? Well, you have an impoverished class of people who will work for those low wages. And you can't have a class like that that's unified. They'll rise up and they'll fight you. So you need to keep them divided, to keep them thinking that the reason they are miserable isn't because of you, the capitalist, but because of people of other races, because of gender differences, because of the gays, because of illegals or foreign entities. This is very much understood by any successful capitalist, and it doesn't take straight-up thinking like a fascist to happen. You refuse to give your employee a raise. Employee asks, well, why? We've made record profits this year. So you say, if you don't like it, then leave. I'll hire someone who will work for this pay because they're a visible minority and have a hard time finding a job as it is, or because they're undocumented and I can do basically anything I want to them. Aw, don't like it? You say your life sucks? Ever consider that it's not because of your boss, but because of them, those guys? You don't have to think like a fascist, but you can see how this leads, inevitably, to the creation and amplification of division and disharmony among the working class. How it needs to, and how such a system would very much benefit from having two parties that, like the working class, are essentially the same in the outcome, but more and more drastically divide the people of the nation. America's fucked because the fascism that you want to fight to stop from coming into power, it already has. Maybe you think that's extreme, but fascism is simply capitalism in crisis. It doesn't need a hand-waving dictator. That worked for Hitler and Mussolini because Italy and Germany at the time really wanted a strong leader to guide them. America prizes, above all else, its freedom and democracy, so fascists will give them it in order to stay in power and enact reactionary laws, and further divide the nation for their own gain. This is the definition of fascism in action that I'm using here, to be clear, and I think it's a fair one. The people who would strip away your rights and pit you against your fellow working-class citizens are already in power. They're already doing it. You have lost. It is too late. You kept saying, it isn't the right time, and let's not do anything too drastic. And now, what used to be considered drastic we now see as action that should have been taken a long time ago. It's action that can no longer be taken. What do, America? Unionize? Unions have been gutted. The elected representatives you relied on failed to protect them. They're great for organization like, yes, please, join a union, if only so that you can meet and cooperate with others who want to do something. But union activity won't save you. Even a nationwide general strike is doomed to fail. 64% of Americans, according to CNBC as of March 2022, are living paycheck to paycheck. If they strike, they starve. They lose their home. For the other 36%, there are no rights, no protections. Sure, you can't be fired for striking, but you can be indefinitely replaced. The company will get on just fine without you. There's a worker shortage right now, but only for the lowest paying jobs in the US. Specialized fields are just as competitive as they always were. Conveniently, it's those positions that are filled by the people who could perhaps afford to strike, and it's their striking that will make the least impact upon American businesses. The term American exceptionalism is thrown around a lot. That the US doesn't need to do things in ways that work for other countries because it's somehow different. Well, it is different, just not in good ways. In this video, I've tried to tear past this overused cliche and dig into what makes the US different materially and ask, can Americans change that with the tools available to them within the American system? Is there anything that can be done? For the answer to that, please read the title again. America. The way forward at this point lies outside the scope of what is formally allowed. Fascism is not going to give you the tools you need to defeat it. A hard reset is your only choice at this point. Your system of government is inherently corrupt, far beyond what any government in the world has ever been. No nation has ever been so thoroughly owned by such incredibly powerful special and corporate interests. Any effort to stem the violence and inequality perpetrated against the nation's citizens will at best lead to nothing, and at worst only widen the already gaping problem. Seize the means of production. That union you're in, push them to take over their workplace and cooperatize. The more that happens, the less powerful your rulers will be. Renters' unions are also crucial at this time. Rent strikes are one of the few kinds of strikes that may still be very effective, and, if they're successful, will ease the burden on the working class. If you can't do any of those, join organizations, join groups, get connected, talk to people, find out what you can do. Mutual aid, monetary donations to activist groups, even a spare bedroom. If nothing else, become part of the network and help other people make connections. And if you aren't living in the United States, like me, understand, we are next. The United States has a strong hold on Western culture, and you know that anything that happens there trickles everywhere else. We are not exempt from the need to do something. Right now, we need to organize, and we need to support revolutionary efforts in the United States. Reach out to local organizations and keep talking. Spread awareness. Apolitical is not an excuse anymore. To be apolitical is to express your contentment with the current situation. Do not allow yourself to be silenced. Now is not the time to be afraid. Now is not the time to be sad. Now is most definitely not the time to say, now is not the time. The time has come and passed. We need to move.